Suella Braverman's return to government is pretty scary. That's principally because she's a right-wing nutjob, as both her leadership campaign and her brief stint as Home Secretary made clear.
We can't fix the problem of illegal migration because of human rights claims and because of an interventionist, politicised foreign court in Strasbourg, which is intervening to thwart our domestic policies, as we saw last month on the Rwanda flight. And I'm afraid the only solution to this problem, and if we want to be honest with the British people, on delivering on Brexit, on taking back control over our borders, is that we do now need to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. I've pledged that, and I challenge all my fellow candidates to make that similar pledge. None of them have. In the context of a mature democracy with a responsive and pragmatic common law tradition, is it always right that minority groups impose their claims upon the rest of society? We need to make sure that the costs of protecting rights are worth the payoff.
Small boats, that really annoys our readers, members here, I'm sure. Why can't you stop the small boats coming?
It's a deeply entrenched and complex problem. That's a simple answer. And I would love to be here saying, well, claiming victory. I would love to be having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream. That's my dream. It's
when
my
will
obsession.
that happen?
It's the Labour Party, it's the Lib Dems, it's the Coalition of Chaos, it's the Guardian reading, tofu eating, wokerati, dare I say, the anti-growth coalition that we have to thank for the disruption that we are seeing on our roads today.
It's completely batshit that she is Home Secretary again. I mean, so unbelievably reactionary on basically every front. It's not, though, just Braverman's reactionary views which have been causing the biggest political furore when it comes to her return to the Home Office. Rather, it's her getting reappointed as Home Secretary so soon after being sacked from exactly the same job. Tim Shipman, in this weekend's Sunday Times, had the inside story on the events that surrounded Braverman's departure from government in the final days of the Truss administration. He wrote this weekend, "The wheels began to fall off Truss's premiership when Simon Case, the cabinet secretary, alerted Truss that Suella Braverman had committed 2 breaches of the ministerial code. She had emailed cabinet papers from her ministerial account to her private Gmail account and then on to backbench veteran Sir John Hayes, a fellow right-winger. She also copied in someone she thought was Hayes' wife, but was actually an assistant to Andrew Percy, the MP for Brigham Goole. After taking advice from colleagues, Percy spoke to the Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, who referred the issue to Case again being the Cabinet Secretary. Braverman was later to argue that the document was simply a written ministerial statement, that she had had a blazing row with Truss about immigration numbers, implying that that was the real reason for her dismissal, and that she had sent it by mistake at 4 a.m. It was, in fact, sent 3 or 4 hours later that morning. A Number 10 source was withering, quote, "She doesn't make any decision without consulting John Hayes," unquote, who had been acting as an unofficial advisor, frequently seen in the Home Office meetings, which had come to the attention of Matthew Rycroft, the permanent secretary. Quote, "Concerns had been raised prior to Wednesday that Braverman might have been sharing restricted government documents with people she shouldn't have," a source said. Braverman agreed to resign. So you can see that initially it was sort of reported this was just any old ministerial statement, that it was a technicality. She should have used her official email address. She actually used a personal one. It does seem like there was something more going on here. This was Suella Braverman leaking information to her allies for political purposes because she wanted to run it past them, and also emailing it to the wrong people. Now, after her reappointment by Rishi Sunak, some of those details were put to Foreign Secretary James Cleverly by the BBC's Nick Robinson.
Suella made a mistake and she has apologised for that mistake. But ultimately, she has very, very recent and current experience within the Home Office. It's clear the Prime Minister wants to make sure that that department is delivering on day one, just like every other department in government.
Did she display integrity, professionalism and accountability?
Well, yes.
When she just let me remind people, when she sent private cabinet papers to a personal email account, forward them to a Tory backbencher, and then was not fully honest about what she'd done.
Well, look, I don't know all the details. You're making statements there which I can't confirm.
Well, you read them in the Sunday Times as I did, so I imagine you do know what I know.
Well, look, I know what's been written, but I can't say I can't say that what did or did not happen. But what
hold
I do
on,
know,
a week ago, Mr. Cleverly, a week ago, the government, the Prime Minister of the day, said she'd breached the ministerial code, and you're addressing me as if I'm discussing gossip and speculation. She quit for a breach of the rules. So I'm asking you a simple question: did she display integrity?
So she said she made a mistake. She apologised. She stood down.
Did she display integrity, professionalism, and accountability?
So yes, by saying that she made a mistake, by apologising for that mistake, for standing down, she did.
Okay.
The Prime Minister has taken her apology, and he has decided that what he wants is an experienced Home Secretary that has got very, very recent experience of the Home Office, so that we can make sure that department, like every other department of government, is focused on serving.
Understood. I want to move on to policy. So
Sure,
you've said that she did display integrity, which will interest people, simply by apologising. Let me just put it to you before we move on to policy, that no one in a business, no one in a public service, no one listening in a school or a hospital who broke the rules of their employment would think that merely by apologising, they could be reappointed a week later. Can you think of a single example of that in your normal life?
People make mistakes, and
Can you think of an example in your normal life of anyone coming back to a job they've been sacked from a week later?
So, Nick, people make mistakes in their work. No one goes to work with the intention of making a mistake. And I've said this, to people in the Foreign Office, that no one goes to work with the intention of making a mistake. It is really important when someone makes a mistake that they own up to it, that they make it clear what happened, that they apologise if that is relevant. Suella did all those things, and then she stood down.
And then she stood down and then got the job back 6 days later. I thought that was a very effective line of questioning, because, he's saying, look, she said sorry, let's move on. Well, he's saying, well, if it was serious enough to sack her 6 days ago, why is it suddenly not serious enough that she can't get rehired? And that question, is there any other profession in the world where you can do something so serious that you get sacked and then you apologise and you get the job again 6 days later? And let's remember, this is one of the most important jobs in the country. And the fact that she can be sacked 6 days prior and then get back in the job, that's not the case in any other industry, any other sector. And he didn't have an answer because there isn't one.
They like to present that it's a new start, we're under a new leader, forget everything that just happened like 5 minutes ago. But really, it's the same people doing the same jobs and making the same mistakes. And I even think the idea of it being a mistake is kind of a misnomer, because it seems to me that the issue here wasn't just that there was this one email that accidentally left her personal email account. It was that there was a systemic issue of her briefing someone on confidential information and confidential issues who shouldn't be briefed on that regularly. That's the issue. That's not a mistake. That's a systemic approach. But I really think that this whole debacle with Braverman, it really encapsulates so much about how dysfunctional the political culture and political system in this country has become now. It really highlights the absurdity of the moment that we are in, because essentially what happened was, this is someone who is one of the cruelest Home Secretaries we've seen. She punishes the most vulnerable people. She deems them to be illegitimate. She thinks they're exploiting the system. Yet this is someone who has absolutely no regard for standards, whether it's standards of international human rights law or ministerial standards. So we have this person, she was fired or resigned or whatever after a few weeks in post. And the reason that she gave, the official reason that was given was a lie. We all knew at the time that it was a lie. And now we know it is. It wasn't out of this integrity of, I made a mistake and I'm standing down, or I disagree with the direction of this government and I'm standing down. It was very clear that she was simply another rat who was fleeing a sinking ship. And she saw it as best for her career to leave at that moment so that she would be more likely to get on to the lifeboat that was coming to rescue them. So that's Rishi Sunak's government. And so even though 10 minutes ago she was considered to be unfit for office, she has returned into the exact same position as if nothing happened. James Cleverly is defending it under the guise of Suella Braverman or the government having integrity, when integrity is like, despite all of the shifts and all of the changes and the eruptions and disruptions that we have seen over the past 4 years, the one thing that has remained completely consistent between all these different prime ministers has been lack of integrity. Whether it's, Johnson partying whilst telling the nation to lock down, whether it's lying to Parliament, whether it's Sunak's tax dodging, we have seen a complete lack of integrity. So I think that the fact that this is the guise under which it's being done is particularly insulting. And I think that's what this Braverman bait and switch really represents. It's emblematic of a broader decay of our political culture, of processes of democratic accountability or democratic standards. And so any mirage that we might have had before, that we live in a country with functional democratic processes and accountability, has now been completely stripped away, because essentially what we have now is, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, coming off the back of a public health crisis, the political class is essentially focused on backstabbing and maneuvering around one another in order to hang another title onto their CV, regardless of what happened, what that means for the rest of the population, and really just lining their path for a lucrative post-politics career. So while the rest of us are still on that sinking ship, you have people on that ship literally just rearranging the furniture. And by furniture, I obviously mean Home Secretaries, because it's essentially the same people delivering the same kind of dysfunctional politics. It's just that the face at the top has changed.